Hello everybody and welcome back to NervithReviews, the show where we review you. Are you feeling alright? How's your day? Has quarantine been getting you down? How's your relationship with your father? And many other questions on NervithReviews. Today we're going to be answering a question from the audience. An audience member asks, I'm thinking of reading Daniel Greene's new book. Do you think I should try it, or should I just assume it's as bad as all the other YouTube novels? So thank you so much for asking this question. Today I'm going to answer it. I do in fact have some experience reviewing other YouTube novels, and they're not as bad as you might think, but, you know, they are on the shaky side. They're not only a debut novel, but they're also an indie novel, which means that this is a lot of gray area because most people who publish like this are not going to be that good. And on top of that, it is a YouTuber book. You see lots of big YouTubers releasing books these days, and a lot of them just turn out to be garbage. You would probably expect them to be better from a fantasy reviewing community, so maybe there would be some gray area, but I have reviewed Peace and Turmoil by Elliot Brooks, so I do have a little bit of experience in what to look out for and what to judge by. And so with that being said, today I'm going to go through and review Breach of Peace by Daniel B. Greene, with, might I add, a special guest. Can you guess who it is? Daniel Greene! Woo!
いやゴッド、あなたは私を何に引きつけましたか?
Don't worry, Daniel. I'll review it very well. And I promise not to say anything negative about it at all. The first thing is that, wow. I did not expect a debut novel from a YouTuber to be this good. Now, there's one important thing that I just absolutely loved right at the end. Now, this is the star of the entire book for me. Unlike bottom feeder writers like Brandon Sanderson and Michael J. Sullivan, you know, the worst guys, the layman, the bottom of the barrel, you might say, Daniel Greene actually goes for a huge, awesome, interesting twist that completely shifts the narrative and completely shifts what you think the book is about. So while some writers have a very obvious, predictable way to end a book, Daniel here has gone the route that I never thought I would see an author go, especially an author that is so small as him. And it absolutely blew my mind because I was completely not expecting it, and it was exactly the type of story that I wanted to read. And it wasn't a twist in the normal sense of that, you know, something that you thought was true is not actually true. There was that, but the interesting thing about this book is that the entire idea of what a story is, the idea of what a plot is, the idea of what this story is meant to represent is completely turned on its head, and that is what I love. There's also a bunch of other twists within the story that I did think were actually very well done. While for most brand new writers, they might not especially see these kinds of huge opportunities for twists, Daniel actually goes ahead and does all these twists like great. There's just a specific point where we just completely shift what is going on. And it's not a complete groundbreaker or anything, but it's enough to have us, when we're maybe not so interested in the story, it's kind of dying down, the tension is really low, and it really ups the ante and really makes it interesting where I wouldn't have expected that to happen. This is just a really high level thing that I did not expect Daniel to get. Isn't that right, Daniel?
私の魂は書かれた言葉を超越しています.
Profound. Now, it's really difficult to review a book that is pretty good, because when you're trying to think of all the negative things to say about it, there's so many small negative things, but when you're trying to think of all the positive things, there's just almost none, just because you kind of feel what a good book is. You feel that something is good, and it's really difficult to figure out what exactly is creating that goodness within the book and trying to explain it to the audience. One of the things was that the relationships were very firmly established. I thought that the characters, while they were pretty good, they're all solid, I found that their relationships with each other were interesting, and they were strong, and they were distinctive, and they were everything that you would want a character to be. And so were all of the emotional arcs. Most of them were actually really solid, and there were a couple that, you know, were a little bit subpar, but considering what they were subpar to, which were his best parts, they can be excused. This is a debut novel, and I can't expect Daniel to create the Stormlight Archive, the Lord of the Rings of debut fantasy novels in the first try. What can I expect? He is trying to do his best, and a lot of that you can really see, while some of it you can just see is so obvious that he's going to improve in. It seems like more that he has a blind spot to this part of the story. So while some parts of the story have just incredible emotional weight to them, other parts, they felt like he just skimmed over them instead of applying what he knew from those parts into these. And one of these is the major twist at the end, which is like the really, oh my god, what's going on? It's just tragedy has struck. That's the part where I thought was, okay, this is a really cool twist, and there were so many good parts of it, but there were also significant downfalls to it, where you can see in other past parts of the same book that Daniel knows how to write a tragedy. He knows how to write emotional weight. But here, it seems like while there is emotional weight, there's too much of a similarity between that emotional weight and this one. One of them should be way higher than the other, especially the big tragedy at the end. So to me, as a reader, it felt like while this was all done well, one should have been added to way more than the other, if that makes any sense. But when we're going page to page, the overall emotional narrative, all of it was good. With that being said, we do have a fantasy YouTuber going on, so maybe the most important thing to talk about is the fantasy setting. Now, we haven't got no Lord of the Rings style, arrogant style dragon writing masterpiece here, but this is a fantasy setting nonetheless. You can see different levels of fantasy going out depending on what type of book that you read. And this seems to be on the level of fantasy if you look into it. Now, right at the start, you would just think, this is not a fantasy novel. This doesn't seem like a fantasy novel. But there are established fantasy aspects of it that just come through time to time. And it's such an intriguing way of applying fantasy to a setting. And what the biggest downfall for this, in my opinion, was that this is not a book. Like, this is a great setting. This is a solid setting. It's such an interesting way of applying fantasy. And then you just kind of stop it there. That's it. So I'm looking forward to the next book. This is going to be an extremely interesting way to see what actually happens with this fantasy setting. I'll be honest, this book is actually incredibly cohesive, way more cohesive than you would have thought. It feels like an actual book written by an established fantasy author. And that's honestly the biggest praise I think I could give it. Like, I know that people are going to, maybe even Daniel Greene will see this if you do. Konnichiwa, buddy. But I know that a lot of people might see this and they think that, what I'm going to rate it is going to be low because I'm saying all these great things about it. Overall, this is an incredibly cohesive book. And I think that that is just so incredible because even the stuff that I rate 2 are already cohesive. They're just kind of cohesive. So if you're seeing a story as overwhelmingly cohesive as this one, something that just feels like it was put together properly, like a really solid, this was planned from the beginning, this was planned from the end, like everything fits together, then that's a really, really good sign, because even established authors have a hard time doing that. Now, I have been a Daniel Greene subscriber for many a times. I think it's been like a couple of years, I'm not exactly sure. Time flies when you're having fun. But I did start this channel after so it must have been a couple of years, yeah. So I have watched a bunch of his videos. I watched his videos way, way back in the day, and he mentioned me one time, and I will play it here.
I've seen a few people from my community trying to start their own booktube things, and Nervith is doing it.
Trying to? Bro, what are you talking about? I made it to the big leagues. Look at me, I have 700 subscribers. How could you say I'm trying? Look at this. Quality content. But I do really, really enjoy his style, and I enjoy his videos. And so knowing all this, just knowing it through passing resemblance of what his interests are and then what his influences are, you can really, really, really see his influences are on his sleeve. You can just pick certain points and just think, where did that come from? And it just pops into your head like, oh, that's a this person influence. And there's one that I just thought was, okay, that's a Stephen King influence. You can say all these things are pulled from so many different other stories, and I think that's a really good thing because it completely comes together in a very cohesive and stylistic story. Now, I have been watching Daniel Greene for a long, long time, and I have talked to him on a couple of occasions. I've talked to him in the comments, I've talked to him in the Discord, so I think you can say we're friends. Unfortunately, now that friendship is over. I can't be friends with somebody who disrespects me this much. They can't even send me an arc? Come on, man. Yes, unlike the last YouTuber, Elliot Brooks' book, I actually paid for this one. So maybe you just missed it, I don't actually know. But I'm gonna assume, for the sake of the video, that you saw me and you hate me. How could you?
How could this happen to me? I made my mistakes, got nowhere to run.
And because I hate you so much, my heart is currently on fire in complete anguish, trying to understand how somebody I could have thought of as a friend could do this to me. Because I hate you so much, I'm gonna go over the things I didn't like either. Sorry, Daniel Greene.
この友情の喪失は私を押しつぶしました。ネルビス、あなたがずっと最高のブックチューバーだったことを知ってください。
I've got it all in this book, and you might think that this is bad television, but I don't care. There's just too many to list. What can I say? So the first thing that I thought was, oh my god, there's a lot of cringy lines in this book. I never ever have to judge people on this because I never see this in an actual book. But here I caught like maybe 10 or a dozen lines of just kind of a cringy line. And this isn't the worst thing in the world because I think most people would just go through. But if you're acquainted with professional writing versus amateurish writing, these are the exact types of things that would scream at you. So I am going to be reading a couple of smaller portions of the book so that, you can understand the context of these. But I'm going to go ahead with one part. Chapman's eyebrows went towards the ceiling, so the door is barred. That can only be done from the inside. That confirms the man who claimed that there was a noise. Crowbar. Now, it might not be so clear why this is exactly amateurish, but the way I see it, this is exposition to the nth degree. This is the most amount of exposition you could possibly have. This confirms that the man who claimed that there was a noise. This is like putting 2 and 2 together for your readers. It makes it so that the people who are actually saying these lines are actually, smart. They're assuming that the people around them are, detectives. They assume that the people around them are police, and you just understand that in this context, everybody would understand what he's talking about. Okay, the next part is, this is on the same page, by the way. The officer released the crowbar at Chapman's second tug, and Chapman got to work. There was often tensions between inspectors and regular members of the force. That just screams amateurish. That's just exposition, straight up. You gotta show this thing, you can't just say it. Do I need to take you back to school? Enroll you in a first grade history class? Okay, that's like day one of what you learn in writer's class. You don't do this. Enroll you in a first grade history class? Like, ugh, this is the stuff that people write in like fan fictions. Like nobody actually makes this insult in real life. 𝒕𝒉𝒆𝒊𝒕𝒂𝒔𝒉 almost went after him. The insufferable egomaniac was going to investigate the most dangerous enemy of the Empire without a partner or even an official escort. Or something like that. I messed up a couple words. But that's exposition also. Like, that's just too much exposition. You gotta trust your readers to pick up on things. And then the last quote, blackness. That's when she went unconscious. That's kind of lazy. You gotta come up with a little bit of a better way to talk about being knocked out. Like, you gotta think of something better than blackness. That's kind of lazy. Now, like I said, there are probably a dozen other examples of this. They're all, overall, it's not a big deal, obviously. Like, I am nitpicking. But at the same time, this is the type of thing that people are going to really look at if they're writers. If people are already interested in writing. People are interested in reviewing. Things like this, like lines like this, they just scream at us to say, oh, come on, you gotta give us a break here. Simply put, just for a lot of very, very obvious exposition, just try not to, I know you know this already, but try not to assume we're dumb to a higher degree than you already are. Assuming we're dumb, I can't believe it. This just adds on to your list of sins. I can't believe you've done this, Lucifer, Daniel Greene. Now, there are other smaller things that you might want to mention. You want to ground readers. You want to make sure that when they're touching something, that you can also describe the sensory ideas to your reader. This is something that every single writer who's new to this craft messes up. You just need to describe different senses other than eyes and smell a couple times. Like, you really got to try to ground the readers in the world around them by creating sensory ideas. The perspectives in this story were just kind of all over the place. At the start, we had like 3 different perspectives in like the same chapter or something, and it just felt really weird to me. These 3 perspectives were completely useless. The story was told from one perspective. Like, what one person was the center of the story. That cannot be explained better than that. One person was the center of the story, and yet there are 3 perspectives. And I don't know why. I don't know why you had all these other perspectives when we should have just had one. Like, it's as simple as that. It even goes against like the characterization of them. Like, one is supposed to be a sneaky character, like a mysterious character, and then you give them a perspective. Like, I don't know, that doesn't make too much sense. These other 2 perspectives were unnecessary completely. The ending, while created a huge, awesome twist of the type of story that you're trying to tell, the end also really felt slightly disconnected from the rest. Like, there's one point where the main character goes to a different location, and you know what I'm talking about, right after the climax. And while they go to this new location, it feels like this location introduces so many ideas that are just completely unexplored. It feels like this is a whole new story starting up, and it's just not. It's just like maybe 10 pages of something else before we end the story. And the epilogue, awesome. Really, really good idea in theory, but in practice, it did not have the same emotional weight as the different parts of the story. As you know, this is supposed to be, the way I'm reading it, I think you expect us to have this great emotional reaction to it, and it just doesn't do that because it is just the epilogue. And the beginning, you know, we have all this established storyline, and that creates empathy from us, but at the end, it just doesn't do that. And I feel like this is the saddest moment, maybe second saddest of the entire story, and it feels like just by putting it in an epilogue and not creating any way for us to empathize with the character beforehand, it feels like it does end up empty. And that's it for my list of sins. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this video. You know, this book, it's a solid book. What can I say? It's way better than the stuff that you would see just on average on the fantasy shelf. The only problem is that while this is a solid, cohesive book, it feels like, I don't know if this is true or not, but maybe it feels like your editor just isn't picking up these small different things that you might not have noticed. These small things don't completely hinder the story. It's just not things that you would think of after reading it. It's just, they are things that while reading it will make you pull back and forget that you're reading a story. So I hope you guys enjoyed this review. If you did, please hit that like button down below and subscribe. Isn't that right, Daniel Greene?
私はダニエル・グリーンです。そしてあなたは𝒕𝒉𝒆𝒊𝒕𝒆を購読するべきです。
He's spitting facts, what can I say? So please subscribe. If you want to see any more videos like this, go ahead and click the subscribe button down below. Comment what you thought of the book. Daniel, if you ever see this, props to you, man. Like, I sent you a message before this, and it seems like you got the idea, but like, I really mean it. This is way better than I expected. I really mean that. Like, other than the novice mistakes, the very small mistakes that you would just writing mistakes, the story was way, way better than I expected. And thank you so much for writing this book that I could read and I could review. I hope next time I can get an arc. Right? Also follow me on my Goodreads, linked down below. Sayonara, buddies.